In this demonstration, I'm going to be looking at source code. Let's take a look at what's under source code for the counter FPGA. And don't get hung up on the word source code. Usually that's kind of affiliated with software. Here we're going to be talking about HDL files. But it's the code, the implementation of the requirements. Okay, so let's click on source code. Again, we're in our counter FPGA. And we have our source code list. In this case, there's only one file that we have associated with the source code at this point. This is probably early in the development of this particular FPGA. As you can see, with any kind of list, you have your fields that you can sort and filter on, you have search capabilities, and you've got pertinent information about the object that's being shown, in this case, source code. Now, the source code isn't actually developed inside of the PACT environment. So what you're really doing here is describing it and pointing to those files or telling PACT the names of the files. You can create a much tighter integration. If you use GitHub or GitLab, you can actually link directly and tie PACT directly into that development repository. So here we're looking at a source code file. It's the passenger counter implementation. It's the 8-bit counter written in VHDL, part of the counter module, and the function is increment decrement. It looks like we don't have this source code linked to any conceptual design or requirements yet, so let's go and edit that. One of the things that PACT enforces, and why I'm showing this, is that PACT enforces what we call sort of a link-as-you-go strategy. One of the problems with, a very common problem in these certification programs is that there's a very stringent requirement for requirements traceability, and that means linking the requirements, the descriptions of the functionality, to the implementation and the test cases and the results, all of that. So all of that has to be linked together. And what people typically do, which is a really bad idea, but a lot of folks do it because they don't know any other way, is to, at the end of a project, right before you're ready for some kind of external audit, run around like a chicken with their head cut off in a spreadsheet trying to link everything together. But to avoid that very common problem and to provide an infrastructure to make it easy to do this, what we're going to do is link as we go. So as we're making PACT aware of the source code that we're developing, where it exists, what it's doing, all of that, we're also going to link it to the appropriate requirements. So in this case, we have our code, and we want to link this. This counter was first described, I think, in requirements at the control board level. So let's do an upward link here. Looks like the counter would be linked to this requirement number 2 and requirement number 3, which talk about incrementing and decrementing the passenger head count. So we're going to save those requirement links. We're also going to see if there's some conceptual design descriptions that describe how this code should be written, how the implementation should be. So let's look at our conceptual design. It looks like this is a pretty good depiction of what the counter should do. So we're going to click on that one, save our links, and now we're going to save our source code. So when we go back to the list, we can see that we now have the appropriate linkages of this implementation in code to the kind of lower level, pretty visual conceptual design description, as well as the higher level requirements that come from that controller board itself. So this is really the essence of source code. You could do those same types of things I talked about earlier. For example, if we're ready to review it, we can export, we can stick it in a PDF or some other format, and easily cut and paste this and put this into our design document for review. So that's about all I'm going to talk about in terms of source code. Again, you're not developing inside of PACT, you're creating records of all that information, you're developing in a repository somewhere outside of the PACT tool itself, but it can be tightly integrated in if you use GitHub or GitLab.